everybody. Welcome back. Taking a look at George A. Romero's Land of the Dead today. This is the, let's see, the 4K and Blu-ray collector's edition. I don't really know what makes it the collector's edition, because I think this is the only version available, at least on 4K. So if you buy this, you're a collector now. And this has 3 discs. So there's the 4K transfer of the unrated version, which is 97 minutes. And then we have the unrated Blu-ray and theatrical Blu-ray. So there's no 4K theatrical, which is pretty lame. It doesn't really bother me that much with this movie, because I prefer the unrated version. There's one scene in the unrated version is mostly just additional scenes of zombies eating people. There is an additional scene with John Leguizamo's character, I forget his name. That is, I think, if I could make my preferred cut, it would be all the additional eating and no additional scene with John Leguizamo, because the scene they add to the unrated version kind of leads to questions that distract me a little bit from the movie. But still, even if not even if that's the case, with this only being the 4K transfer, I would just still watch this version anyways. The additional zombie eating scenes are pretty gnarly, and I would say, I don't know what the percentages are, but a good portion of people watching this are here for the zombies. So, but yeah, this should be the 4K theatrical. I don't understand why they do this sometimes, but what are you gonna do? Excuse me. I'll shut this here, and I'm gonna move this around. You can kind of see that, right? That's not too bad. Just have a sip of water. Okay, so what do we got here? George Romero is back, and in this movie, he's better than ever. I don't agree with that. That's Kurt Loder. MTV News Kurt Loder, that's right, the one and only. Legendary filmmaker George A. Romero returns to unleash another chapter in his classic zombie series. In this towering tale of terror. Towering tale? Pretty good. A new society has been built by a band of ruthless opportunists who live inside a luxurious skyscraper high above the less fortunate citizens who must eke out a hard life on the streets below. With the survival of the city at stake, a group of mercenaries is called into action to protect the living from the evolving army of the dead, waiting outside the city walls. Land of the Dead features a cast of amazing actors, including Dennis Hopper. I would consider Dennis Hopper an amazing actor. Simon Baker. At least based on this movie, I would not consider him an amazing actor. Asia Argento, daughter of Dario, Robert Joy, and John Leguizamo. Well, this is the... I mean, if you're not familiar with this movie, this is the fourth installment in Romero's, well, it was a trilogy. It's not anymore. Actually, I think there's a fifth installment. There's Diary of the Dead. I didn't see it. Maybe there's another one too. I don't. Well, for me, this is the last installment. So if you made more, I actually haven't seen them. It's kind of like, what's that? The last Star Wars movie. This is a good thing. I've done myself a favor and I've completely forgotten it. Return of the Jedi? No. I know what that movie is. The one after The Last Jedi, I've buried it. So, the movies following Land of the Dead may not even exist to me because I haven't seen them. But preceding Land of the Dead, we have Night of the Living Dead. And Night of the Living Dead came out in the late 60s, 68, I believe. And incredible movie, like totally holds up. We just watched it recently. And Dawn of the Dead, a pretty big gap between Day and Dawn. 10 years. Dawn of the Dead came out in 78. And then we have Day of the Dead, which came out in 84 or 85, mid-80s. And then we have the largest gap between films, with Land of the Dead coming out in 2005. Yes, 2005. And I feel with Land of the Dead, I feel this movie probably wouldn't have happened if there wasn't this zombie resurgence in the early aughts, because that kind of 28 days later kind of kicked that off, which coincidentally has a third installment coming out that had 28 weeks later. 28 weeks later, I really enjoyed too. But the third movie comes out in like a month, and then after 28 days later, we have the remake of Dawn of the Dead by Zack Snyder, which is, if you haven't seen it, much better than you would think. There are certain Zack Snyder flourishes here and there. Well, if one has an incredible opening sequence, I feel like Zack Snyder does a good job with opening sequences. Like Watchmen, for example, is probably the best part of Watchmen. And James Gunn did the screenplay for the Dawn of the Dead remake. But Dawn of the Dead, that movie is a good example of one that has a 4K release that is similar to this, where only the unrated cut has the 4K transfer, and that one's the opposite. I prefer the theatrical cut for Dawn of the Dead, and it's the same kind of deal. You get 3 versions of the movie, or 2, but they're on Blu-ray, so pretty lame there as well. Anyways, I'm digressing. What am I talking about here? So zombies were coming back, no pun intended, with people going to the theater, pretty excited. And so George Romero, I don't know how long he's been sitting on the story of Land of the Dead. So I think with Land of the Dead, the biggest issue for me, I think this movie is watchable, which isn't like a real endorsement, but like the trilogy is really good. Like it's a landmark trilogy, and so much time goes by between the 2 movies where, or maybe he was sitting on the Land of the Dead screenplay for a long time and just couldn't get funding. I really don't know. But to me, Day of the Dead is a great way to end the trilogy. I really like Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead is probably my favorite, the 3. and probably is my favorite. I'd say it is my favorite. And it's a really compelling story in Day of the Dead, and the acting's serviceable, but the gore effects are just like astonishing at times. Just really innovative moments of human consumption. Some really, really impressive gore effects in that. I would say more impressive than Day of the Dead. And yeah, this movie, you kind of put the trilogy to bed, and you stuck the landing, and then you kind of come back. 20 years later, I feel like you have to be real confident in the story you want to tell, because like you're revisiting something that's really pretty treasured by horror fans. So, and I don't really think Land of the Dead is it. Like I think it's really like it's a competent movie. It's not terribly exciting. Like the biggest issue for me with Land of the Dead is it's just not very. The story that he decides to tell isn't very compelling. Maybe that's due to Simon Baker. Like, and he's a handsome enough guy, but he's just not interesting as in this movie. His character, and you don't have to say a lot to be interesting. Like if you were to, I don't know, I think it's not really possible to go back and recast now, but I know Harrison Ford popped to mind for some reason, but he's just a guy that has, charisma to spare for these types of movies, and that's someone I can see people, following. Simon Baker, not so much. And Dennis Hopper's character is pretty interesting, but you don't spend very much time with him, a lot less time than I would like. And at least John Leguizamo's character, you know what his motivations are. It's kind of muddy for the rest of the characters. And yeah, there's the ivory tower of sorts with the skyscraper with all the fortunate, wealthy folks going about their what? You don't really know. There's like a mall in the skyscraper, but there's no time really devoted to the like the atrocities happening outside their window. And you could argue, well, you don't really need to have time devoted to that. It should be self-evident, but I don't know. I really feel like that's more interesting. There's a scene in this movie with where all the less fortunate, citizens, as they say here, are using zombies as entertainment purposes, like torturing the zombies, if you will. It kind of reminded me of that scene in Spielberg's AI where the robots are being abused for entertainment, but it's brief. So there's ideas in this movie. There's things that I think that are kind of inherently interesting, but the story with the mercenaries isn't one of them, and that's who you spend the majority of your time with. And it just kind of goes from zombie attack to zombie attack, which I get. This is a zombie movie. You are going to see people being eaten by zombies in not as creative ways as you've seen in the past, but in the unrated version at least there's a degloving that is pretty good, if you're into this kind of stuff. But more of a disappointment considering the pedigree here. So worth watching. I like having it, and it's something I'll probably watch again in a few years. But when you look at who's responsible for the movie, for me it's kind of hard not to be a little disappointed in the outcome. But it's not a movie I feel shouldn't exist. I think he certainly earned another opportunity to make a zombie movie, and very cool that he was able to get a pretty substantial budget, at least for his movies, to make another zombie film. So, okay, thanks for watching.